national leadership has been meeting here in Sydney today to discuss what the impact of the government's carbon pricing mechanism will be on the industries which we cover. As people know, over 85% of AWU members work in emissions-intensive, trade-exposed industries. They make the goods and they work for the polluters which the government and the nation's media have been talking about over the last couple of months. Carbon pricing is not an easy issue for our union to deal with. It's not an easy issue for our members to deal with. They make the materials which can be used by our nation as we transform to a greener economy. You can't build wind power without steel. You can't build solar power without aluminium or glass. You can't build the roads to those facilities without cement. And this is an issue which we take very seriously. The AWU takes the job security of our members as our #1 priority. As we have been engaging in this debate, we have always entered it with the understanding that carbon pricing is inevitable. Both the Coalition and the Labor Party and the Greens have committed to cutting Australia's carbon pollution. In the 2007 election, both Labor and the Coalition went to that election with a promise of implementing a carbon price. So as we look at this issue, we have to deal with the realities of how we navigate our way through what is an incredibly complex issue with our always present mission of ensuring that our members' job security is protected. We said, quite rightly and quite proudly, that our union would not support a price on carbon that costs the jobs of our members. That is a position that we had when we made that position clear 2 years ago, we made it clear several months ago, and we hold that position today. But we believe that the government has developed a package which addresses substantially the concerns we have about the impact on our members' industries. We believe the government has developed a package which ensures that jobs won't be lost in emissions-intensive, trade-exposed industries as we make the transition to a low-carbon future. The compensation levels for emissions-intensive, trade-exposed industries are what we and most in industry were asking for as we entered into these negotiations. Most importantly, the Australian steel industry, which we proudly represent, it finds itself in a very adverse economic situation at the moment. We have said, and we said, that we do not believe, at the currency sitting where it is at the moment, and with trade sitting where it is at the moment, that Australian steel could afford to pay any price on carbon at the moment. So that's why we were especially pleased to see that the government announced 94.5% compensation for steel and then guaranteed an additional $300 million of funding for the steel industry over 4 years to essentially mitigate steel paying any carbon price. That is what we asked for, that was what was delivered. And so therefore our union will support the introduction of the carbon price as outlined by the government. We'll continue to campaign and to work with government and industry and all parties to make sure that as this price is developed and as the legislation is developed, that those job protections which we were guaranteed by the Prime Minister are delivered upon. There is no excuse for any employer of any AWU member to lay off any worker under this pricing mechanism. The compensation levels guaranteed under the mechanism will ensure that there is no economic imperative on those workers or on those companies to lay off those workers. And we will hold to account any company who attempts to lay off AWU members under the guise of this tax. We have looked at the economic impact. We have spent the last week speaking with industry and crunching the numbers. And the numbers make sense and the numbers show that there is no economic imperative for AWU employers to lay off members under this tax. Australian manufacturing finds itself in a very difficult situation. The dollar sitting where it is, rampant dumping and increased trade liberalisation has created a perfect storm scenario for Australian manufacturing. We are concerned about its future, and that's why our union will continue to campaign on the issue of saving the Australian manufacturing industry. We'll be running that campaign with a carbon tax or without a carbon tax. The reality is that until we have some fundamental changes in the nature of our economy, Australian manufacturing will continue to be under pressure, and it is incumbent on all political parties to get behind a sector which employs almost 1 million Australians to ensure it survives during this very difficult period. That's why we are calling on Tony Abbott to support the Steel Industry Transformation Fund. Tony Abbott visited many AWU workplaces during his scare campaign. He looked into the eyes of our members and said that he would support and save the Australian steel industry. And that's why we are so disappointed that he has come out and said that he would vote against the $300 million Steel Industry Transformation Fund, which will ensure and guarantee the future of the Australian steel sector. If he is a man of his word, and if he is the conviction politician that he tells us he is, he should be backing the $300 million Steel Transformation Fund to save Australian steel.
You said earlier that you withdraw support for the carbon price if it would mean the loss of even one job. I noticed you changed the phraseology there slightly. It's going to be pretty easy for the carbon price to be responsible for the loss of one job, isn't it?
No, not in AWU sectors. Under what has been designed and what has been announced by the government, there is no excuse for any AWU employer to lay off any workers. That is clear. There is no excuse. There is no economic imperative. Now, we've seen employers, every time we have a wage case, every time we have a bargaining round, say that an increase in payroll tax, an increase in superannuation guarantee, an increase in wages will lead to job losses. And it doesn't. There is no economic imperative under this package for any employer of AWU members to lay off workers. And if they do try to lay off AWU members under the guise of this tax, we will campaign against them. We will name and shame them. We will out them. Because we are sick to death of the scare campaign being run by some employers in this country who are trying to use their own lack of investment in skills, their own lack of investment in new technology, and using the guise of the carbon tax to give an excuse for why they haven't been able to guarantee the survival of manufacturing.
How can you be so confident that there won't be any cause for the loss of one job as a result of the carbon tax, especially with the economic circumstances that we find ourselves in?
Well, it's the numbers. I mean, we can look at what the impact of the currency is on manufacturing. We can look at what the impact of trade is on manufacturing. And we can look at what the impact of the carbon tax will be on these sectors. And we know, based on these numbers, there is no economic incentive for any AWU employer to lay off an AWU member. We are confident that test has been met. We've spoken with industry, and as we've looked through the most impacted sectors, particularly the steel industry, we know that's been removed. Now, the steel industry is in a very bad way. It's at its, trading under the highest dollar we've ever seen. In fact, the Australian steel industry is facing its worst crisis it probably ever faced. And what's the government's response? A $300 million transformation fund. The biggest single investment in Australian steel since the Second World War, which we are confident will guarantee the survival of the Australian steel sector if Tony Abbott votes for it. If Tony Abbott votes for it. And it's incumbent upon him to live up to his promise and be a man of his word and vote for the Steel Industry Transformation Fund.
What assurances have you, or did you seek from the Prime Minister that no jobs would be lost prior to the decision today to endorse the tax? Did you seek any specific assurances?
Well, we entered into negotiations with the government and we outlined what levels of compensation we thought were needed to ensure the survival of our sectors, to ensure that the economic impact on those sectors wouldn't be to the point which would lead to job losses. And we got that. We wanted to guarantee that the GFC buffer in the compensation package would be maintained. We got that. We wanted to make sure that Australian steel wouldn't pay a cent until the dollar recovered. We got that. We looked at the issues in terms of transformation funds, the issues in terms of investments into green technology, and there's still a lot of detail to be worked out. I mean, we want to make sure that with these new green energy funds and the new investments into renewables, that is Australian steel and Australian aluminium and Australian solar technology that is being used in the development of that green industry. These are issues we can work out. But when we negotiated with the government in good faith, our concerns were met. And every single issue and level of compensation we asked for was delivered.
If we put aside jobs for a moment as a measure, what about international competitiveness? Rio Tinto says it believes it'll be compromised by the tax.
Rio Tinto. the company that made $16 billion last quarter,
What a
the
pity.
company that is continually trying to undermine Australian labour standards by locking out the union out of their workplaces, the company that, frankly, monkeys could do a better job of running. Well, I don't take what Rio Tinto has got to say much of a religion. They are making $1 billion out of the Australian coal industry. They'll make that before a carbon tax. They'll make that after a carbon tax. The big miners in this country constantly crying poor, and it's shameful that so many in the Australian media believe them. If they want to shut down their coal operations in this country, fine. I'll buy it. I'm happy to invest in it. Be a good investment for the union. I mean, frankly, when we are looking at the issues of emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries, of course there is always an issue of international competitiveness. That's an issue today with the advent of free trade agreements and ongoing trade liberalisation. It's not going to go away if there's no carbon tax. And that's our message to AWU members. Australian manufacturing is under massive pressure today. It'll be under massive pressure if there is a carbon tax. It'll be under massive pressure if there isn't a carbon tax. The important thing that we need to do as a union is navigate our way through and get the best deal possible for AWU members. Our benchmark was jobs. That was met.
Was the executive's decision today a unanimous one, or was there some dissent among some of the members?
No, it was a unanimous decision.
Paul, is Julia Gillard still the right person to be leading the Labor Party given today's polls and the difficulties that she has been having trying to sell this policy?
Well, reform's never easy and change is never easy. And it's going to be a long way before the government recovers. But it's important that reform isn't stopped. I mean, when we look at this issue, we know that carbon pricing is going to happen. For all of Tony Abbott's empty promises, we know that a future coalition government will have a price on carbon. And I know, when I think about the Australian manufacturing industry, that I'd rather negotiate with a Labor government who believes in the manufacturing industry than a coalition government. Remember this, every steel mill that has shut in Australia has shut under a coalition government. Tony Abbott voting against the Steel Industry Transformation Plan is true to form, because he was the Parliamentary Secretary for Employment when 5,000 AWU members were put out of work with the closure of the Newcastle Steelworks. And we know that Labor in government has saved the Australian steel sector. They did that in the 1980s with the Button Steel Plan. We're confident they'll do it today. They did it in 2009 during the global financial crisis.
I was going to say, but why isn't the electorate convinced of this?
Well, it's a hard issue to sell, Michael, and as it is with many big reforms, they're never popular. But we're confident that if the government gets its message right and does what it's done in this package in protecting our members' jobs, they'll get through this rough patch. The polls aren't what concerns our union. What concerns the AWU is who is doing the right thing for our country, who is stopping work choices coming back, who is ensuring that Australian manufacturing not only survives but thrives, who is investing in our sector to ensure that these areas remain open, and that is the Gillard Labor government.
You're saying about the government getting its message right. Do you think up until this stage it hasn't got the message right on this issue?
Well, look, it hasn't been perfect, has it? I mean, you know, Blind Freddy can tell you that. But that's their job. They'll work it out. Our job is to ensure that our members' interests are protected. And with this and the announcement of these compensation levels and the announcement of these plans, this will be protected. The onus is now on Tony Abbott to live up to his word, to live up to the promises that he made to thousands of steel workers across this country. Is he a liar, or is he going to tell the truth? Is he a liar, and is he going to vote against the Steel Industry Transformation Plan, or is he going to live up to his promises and vote for it and save the Australian steel sector?
Do you think that Julia Gillard will survive, though, or do you think there could be another leadership shuffle?
Of course she'll survive. She'll be the leader of the Labor Party tomorrow, and she'll be the leader of the Labor Party at the next federal election. I've already bet my house on it.
You said that the government's salesmanship hasn't been perfect. In what areas have they been wanting?
Look, it's not my job to provide a running commentary on how the government performs. Plenty of people give me commentary on how I perform in my job. My main concern, the concern of our national leadership today, has been about the state of the Australian manufacturing industry and doing the right thing for the environment and the right thing for the economy. Carbon pricing, as I said, is a hard issue for our union to deal with. It's hard for us to get the language right on it all the time. But the important thing is that we need to make sure that as we move to a greener economy and as we move to a situation where there will be carbon pricing across the world, that we don't create carbon leakage. we save Australian jobs, and we do the right thing by our members, and that has been done in this package.
Speaking of members, if the carbon tax proves to be inflationary, will you seek to sort of insulate your members from those effects via higher wage claims?
Well, I guarantee you that as we have done for 125 years, we will always be seeking to improve the wages and conditions of our members. Seeking higher wage claims we'll do in a low inflationary situation, and we'll do it in a high inflationary situation. That's our job, and that's what 135,000 working men and women pay us to do. If there is an increase in inflation, we will seek commensurate pay increases, but all the modelling to date says that there won't be an increase in inflation driven by carbon pricing. Right?